Hey everybody, today I'm going to talk about the 1967 French film La Collectionneuse, directed by Éric Rohmer. Okay, La Collectionneuse in English just means the collector, but in this case it refers to a woman who collects men. The plot of La Collectionneuse is very simple. However, it is a very complex film, but the complexity comes not so much from the plot, but from the narrative. In this case, the narrative is largely in the form of the interior monologue of the film's protagonist, and compounding this are the nested levels of irony that are embedded in the presentation. La Collectionneuse is constructed from a first-person point of view, and our protagonist is a guy named Adrien, played by Patrick Bauchau. And Adrien is a 6'4" male model looking guy, and we're not really sure what Adrien does for a living, but he seems to be some kind of art dealer. He looks like he's in his late 20s, maybe 30 years old. He's a very cerebral and analytical guy, but he's also kind of an arrogant jerk. So our hero, Adrien, has the opportunity to take a vacation at his friend's villa on the French Riviera. And it's not the kind of vacation where you go to the beach with your family or on a cruise. It's the kind where you just want peace and quiet, and maybe you'll even get some heavy reading in, that sort of thing. He's going to be separated from his girlfriend, who will be out of the country for a while. So he just wants to relish his freedom, purge his mind of all thoughts, and basically do nothing, at least nothing productive. So he's joined to this villa by his artist friend Danielle, who's another pontificating intellectual type, and Danielle pretty much shares Adrien's objectives for this vacation, but there's one thing that Adrien wasn't expecting, and that's that there's a young woman named Haydée who is also staying at this house. So Haydée, played by Haydée Politoff, is the collector referred to in the film's title, and she's about 19 or 20, I'd say, and she seems to be kind of a free spirit who sleeps around a lot. She brings guys back to the house, and they're up all night thumping around, and this annoys the hell out of Adrien on multiple levels. In a nutshell, Adrien wants to sleep with Haydée himself, but he thinks of her as a tramp, somebody who's not worthy of a high-value man like himself. So instead of pursuing her in a straightforward, direct way, he tries to manipulate her into pursuing him. Of course, this fails miserably, and we see Adrien slowly losing the plot, so to speak, as the film progresses. Okay, so Adrien is the central character of La Collectionneuse. In fact, much of the film's content is conveyed via Adrien's running voiceover commentary, which is conveyed in a slightly stilted literary style on the events in the film as he perceives them. Adrien is an arrogant, narcissistic man, and his big ego makes him an unreliable narrator. The audience perceives subtle and not so subtle discrepancies between what Adrien is telling us is happening and what we actually see happening on screen, with the result that much of the film's plot, so to speak, is simply a creation of Adrien's mind. But it's not that he's making stuff up out of whole cloth, not at all. It's more that he's interpreting certain events in ways which are almost certainly not shared by the others involved. And Rohmer uses Adrien's relentlessly logical introspection to both explore certain ideas that interest him and also to make fun of Adrien's narcissistic self-absorption. This film is a great introduction to the work of director Éric Rohmer, and Rohmer is definitely an enigma in French cinema. He was a key figure in the so-called French New Wave of the late 1950s, which was a group of young filmmakers and critics associated with a magazine Cahiers du Cinéma, and many of the directors we associate with the French New Wave, like Truffaut, Chabrol, Godard, Rivette, they were writers for this magazine, and Rohmer was actually the editor of this magazine at that time. However, Rohmer was a bit different from these others in that he was both a bit older than they were and also more politically and culturally conservative than they were. And this caused a lot of friction with the other members in the movement. Rohmer was a devout Catholic, for example, and he was not on board with the growing shift of the French New Wave to the political and cultural left. Rohmer had very strong ideas about film and about art, literature, and culture in general that struck many of the other New Wave filmmakers as rigid and even reactionary. And we actually see some of these views expressed in this film by the character Adrien, particularly toward the end of the film. So this rift with his colleagues eventually led to Rohmer's leaving the magazine Cahiers du Cinéma and going off to do his own thing. And though Rohmer was the oldest of this core group of French New Wave directors, he was the last one to really launch his career as a filmmaker. He was actually in his late 40s when La Collectionneuse was made. Rohmer had a formidable and wide-ranging intellect, and his films, particularly his early ones, are full of sharp, rational analysis and introspection that is not for all taste, but definitely set him apart as a filmmaker. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the cinematographer on this film, who at the time was a little-known Spaniard named Nestor Almendros. So Nestor Almendros is today known as one of those rock star cinematographers with a ton of snob appeal. Sort of like if you're into jazz, there were some recording engineers from the 1950s and 60s like Rudy Van Gelder at Blue Note Records or Fred Plout at Columbia, who had made names for themselves due to their legendary technical skill. So Rohmer knew Almendros from working with him on some educational films that he had done, but he'd never worked with him on a feature film before. This was only Rohmer's second feature film, and Almendros had never filmed a feature film before at all. Almendros is particularly known now as a cinematographer who made masterful use of natural light. And in fact, he kind of looked down his nose at what he thought of as the overuse of artificial lighting in cinema. He was kind of a purist, and he had very high standards for his own work. So in this sense, he was a perfect match for Rohmer on this project. In fact, it was fortunate that Almendros was so preoccupied with natural lighting because they didn't have enough money for artificial lighting on La Collectionneuse, at least not much of it. And they certainly didn't have enough cash to pay a bunch of union electricians to wire all that stuff up. So they had to make do with what they had, and they wired it up themselves when necessary, and they even used mirrors at times to get natural light into places where it was lacking. Almendros had to work with old, scratched camera lenses that lacked optical precision, and this was partly responsible for the distinctive visual style that La Collectionneuse has. The story of how La Collectionneuse was made is as interesting as the film itself. It was filmed in June of 1966, and to say that this was a low-budget film doesn't quite capture it. Rohmer barely had enough money to buy the necessary film stock for this. Film was very expensive back then, and he got by with about half the amount of film that a normal feature film would have required. And he did this by planning out every shot in meticulous detail, and also by allowing only one take for each shot. If they messed it up, too bad, they had to move on. This meant that they couldn't use direct sound in production because they couldn't risk a shot being spoiled by some kind of unwanted noise on the set. So all the sound was added in later, and Rohmer put extensive thought even into this. For example, he made sure that he had authentic regional bird song in the outdoor scenes, and he made sure that the crickets were chirping at the correct time of night, etc. If you notice that loud jet aircraft noise toward the beginning of the film, Rohmer added that in there on purpose for authenticity because that was something that they did experience while filming, and that was the kind of director that Rohmer was. The low to non-existent budget on this film meant that all the actors in this film weren't really actors. They were just people that Rohmer knew. The character Daniel, for example, was real-life artist Daniel Pommereulle, and he was just playing himself in the film. So many of these people were only in the film because Rohmer gave them a financial stake in the proceeds, if there happened to be any. Everybody actually stayed at that same house that you see in the film, which was in Saint-Tropez on the French Riviera. But despite the gorgeous, pristine images captured by Almendros in the beach area, they apparently all had to spend a couple of hours out there picking up trash on the beach to achieve that unspoiled look. La Collectionneuse turned out to be rather successful commercially and certainly far exceeded Rohmer's expectations for the film. It finally put Rohmer on the map as a filmmaker, and it also launched the career of cinematographer Nestor Almendros as well. These two men went on to make several more films together, and these films comprise some of Rohmer's most interesting work. Haydée Politoff became something of a minor icon after this, and went on to appear in a string of Italian films over the next decade or so. Okay, that's it for La Collectionneuse. Do check this film out if you haven't seen it. It's a great introduction to Rohmer's enigmatic style, and if you've already seen it, there's always something new to discover in it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you for watching. I'm Rod Richards. Until next time.